Nancy, so I understand this. What is your time now?
8:28.
8, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good day to all of you and welcome. Thank you for joining us on our live. I am Nancy Regan and I am joined by 𝗗𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂, Mark Horton, and Graham Stephen. We are the International Reliability Centered Maintenance Certification Committee, or the IRCC. One of our examiners who isn't joining us today is Chris James, but he will most certainly be back. And we are dedicated to ensuring that RCM principles are promulgated correctly and that you get the best out of your RCM analyses by making sure that your team members know what proper reliability-centered maintenance is in accordance with the international standards SAEJ 1011 and SAEJ 1012. We've got a packed show for you today. We've got a couple of exciting things to talk about. So first of all, let me just have a look in the comments. If you can make sure everybody, can you see and hear us? Just put a quick comment in there just to make sure. And in the meantime, let's see who's joining us today. Winifred. Hey, Joey from North Alabama. Me too. I'm in Huntsville. Yeah, put where you're joining us from. Fabian from Burgundy in France. Welcome, Fabian. Sonia, thank you so much for joining us. Andy, Todd. Hi, Todd. Thank you for joining us again. All right, great. Okay, so Sam says he can hear us fine, so that's excellent. All right, we are going to cover three things today. One, we've had a lot of questions about the Level 1 RCM certification exam and what you need to do or how you need to prepare to pass it. So we're going to talk about that. In the middle of it all, Mark Horton is going to debunk one of the biggest misconceptions about maintenance that could be costing you part of your reliability and could be increasing your costs potentially. The other thing we're going to talk about is one of the top questions we've had is what subjects are covered in the Level 1 RCM certification exam and how can you find out what those topics are? So Mark, can I hand it off to you and you talk about what subjects need to be covered and how people prepare and how can they find out, they can find out about what those subjects are?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nancy. Well, there isn't a formal syllabus for this, but there's a list of suggested subjects. If you go to rcmcertification.org, on the certification section, there's a list of subjects that you want to check to make sure you've covered them and that you feel comfortable with them. But something I've heard a lot of people ask is, well, do I have to take a training course before I take the test? And I can't really give you a book list or recommend a specific course, but I really want to give you an idea of what the exam's like and take a look at the level of experience that you might need to have before you take the exam.
So Mark, you mentioned a training course. Are you talking a formal course or what kind of training? Could you be a little more specific?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the formal training course, yeah, it's a really good option because it'll give you not just the theoretical experience that you get from reading a textbook, but it should give you some practical experience in an environment where you can make mistakes and find out what it is you don't know. If you've attended an introductory RCM course with the practical content, usually that's over a period of 2 or 3 days, or you've taken that sort of course by distance learning, it's probably about the right level for this exam. And I've got to mention one thing, of course. Reading John Mowbray's classic RCM 2 book, if you've got it, then reread it. If you haven't got it, well, probably it's a really good buy because he makes all of the key topics in this really approachable. So even if you've taken an RCM course in the past, rereading John's book is a really good idea and it might help you a lot for the exam. But I'm going to give you a warning at this point because I know the way some people cram for exams and they kind of try to memorize everything. I've seen people in libraries just trying to get stuff into their heads. And I need to give you a warning because you could memorize the entirety of John Mowbray's book, or you could put the whole of the SAE, JA 1011, JA 1012 standards in your head, and you still wouldn't pass this exam. Spending 3 days sitting in a training course isn't a guarantee either. And here's why, because you're not going to pass this unless you understand the content. That's the really, really important point here. Understanding the content about maintenance, functions, failures, consequences, and how to manage the failures, that's the key. Oh, and you don't want to have too many misconceptions either, but I'm going to come back to that a little bit later.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark, because there's definitely a difference between memorizing and understanding for sure. But, one question that we have had is, are there some things that are some questions geared towards things that there are some things that do need to be memorized?
Yeah, I don't want to mislead you on that. There are some things in here, basically definitions and parts of RCM that really you should try to memorize. You don't just have to know them word for word, but you need to know, again, what it says and what they mean. But most of all, you've got to know the language of RCM, and you've got to understand what those words mean and why that's what they mean. Because they have, some things have really specific meanings in RCM. You need to know that.
Okay. So, Mark, I mean, I'll speak for myself, and I'm willing to bet I'm not alone in this, is that when it comes to taking exams, it can be scary, right? You know, there's some nerves involved when you take an exam. So what do you think? Could you share with us maybe the kind, not the kinds of questions, but the format of the questions and the types of questions like true, false, etc., things like that? Could you share a little bit of that with us?
Oh yeah, I'm going to do that, because I don't know how many times, I really understand that, Nancy. I've taken so many exams in my life, but I still feel that if I'm up against something new, I still get that feeling in the pit of my stomach that something is going to go wrong and I'm going to be shown up for the complete fraud I obviously am. Yeah, it happens. Yeah, that still happens to me now. You know, one thing you can think about, imagine yourself trying to produce an exam like this one. There are some limitations on the sort of questions we can ask you. We're not going to ask you to write out long definitions from memory like you might have done in school or college. And, you know, you're not going to have to write an essay about, I don't know, the importance of secondary functions to the development of a modern industrialized economy, or, I don't know, the relationship between failure finding and quantum physics. Now, that's a complete promise. You're not going to have to produce something, you know, that's going to take hours to write. Of course, if you want to write to us on one of those subjects, we'd really love to hear from you. But I'm not going to give you any more marks in the exam for it. Sorry. So I got some. Hold on. I got some examples here.
Yep.
If the screen share is working.
Yep.
Of the sort of questions you're going to see, and these are not the questions you're going to see. You know, you haven't just turned into the nut vendors certification committee. We've just illustrated the type of questions with some. Are they all food questions? I can't remember.
Not all of them.
No. Okay. So here's the sort of things you'll see: multiple choice questions. First question, which of the following are nuts? It's a really simple question, isn't it? Almonds, cashew, peanuts, and macadamia nuts. So, you know, almond nuts, cashew nuts, peanuts, macadamia nuts. It's a standard question when you get into a pub quiz. You know, which of these are nuts? Well, you might say that, you know, almonds, cashews, and I see the one down at the bottom, macadamias are the nuts, and everybody knows that peanuts aren't a nut. I can just see, I don't know whether the chat is starting to fill up already, but hold your horses just a second, because I've got an explanation here. So you would select 1, 2, and 4, and peanut isn't a nut. We all know that. And I was just saying to somebody this morning, this was one of the questions we were going to ask, and this is literally this morning. And I was saying, everybody knows that peanuts aren't nuts. And she said, oh, you mean like almonds aren't nuts and cashews aren't nuts? And she came out with 4 or 5 nuts that weren't nuts. And I thought, oh, okay. So writing nut questions isn't as easy as we thought it was. And so for those of you who are about to fill up the chat telling me that almost everything I think is a nut isn't a nut, I sort of already know that, and I'm really sorry. So apparently almonds aren't nuts, they're drupes, and cashew nuts aren't nuts, and pistachio nuts aren't nuts, and pine nuts aren't nuts. I didn't really know that. So it just shows you how difficult it is to write even this sort of question. So this was intended to be 3 out of 4. It turns out only 1 out of 4 is really a nut, but the principle's the same. This is one type of question you're going to see. Another one you'll see in there is putting things into order. You might want to think hard about the sorts of things we're going to ask you to put into order in the exam. So here's a set of days: Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Thursday, Tuesday. You're not going to take very long to decide. They go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I suppose you could start on Sunday if you feel like it. These things are never that simple. Okay, there are a number of true or false questions. Simple question. There are 30 days in the month of September. You select true or false. So there are, last time I looked, 30 days in the month of September. Perhaps it's the first one I'm really sure about. And then I think the final one I've got in here, here are the steps that could be in building a house. 1, sterilize the scalpel. 2, pour the foundation. 3, add vanilla to the cake mix. Or 4, shine your shoes. You might find me shining my shoes and letting somebody else do the work on the foundation. But the answer here is, of course, pour the foundation. So that's just 1 out of 4. And you'll see all of those in there, all of those types of questions. So there's nothing really difficult about that. It works in your web browser. It's pretty simple to use. Okay.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
Sorry, that's fine,
Sorry.
Nancy. That's fine.
You want me
Okay.
to take the share screen off?
Yeah, if you could, please, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so remember, this is also, it's a test for RCM group members and for members of reliability teams. It's not intended for facilitators or experts. So the emphasis is on what you understand about maintenance, about equipment failure, and about the language of RCM. And the whole idea is we're testing group members here. So if your group facilitator says, let's look at the P2F interval, or can we list the secondary functions, or we're going to look at a failure finding task, you know straight away what that means. And that's what the exam tests. You don't have to know, you have to know what it doesn't mean too, but I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment.
So, Mark, something that came up when we were trialing the exam is that some people got some very simple questions wrong. And when we talked to them, one of the remarks was, well, we didn't think that it would be that easy or straightforward, so we thought you were trying to trick us. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that we're not really here to trick anybody.
Yeah, and actually, you know, that really can be a problem for some people, Nancy. I mean, sometimes people believe, I don't know why, that examiners are evil, bitter, and twisted. And the result is that they get themselves into this mindset and they try to overthink the test because they're trying to work out the examiner's motives. And they can sometimes think, and this is what gets the really good people sometimes, they look at some questions, they look at the possible answers, and they think, well, number 2 is obviously the answer, so that can't be right. You know, these examiners, they've got to be more tricksy than that. Now, it is so frustrating when people do that because it does tend to be the good people who see the right answer and think it can't be because it's too obvious. You know, when we're not being bitter and twisted, you wouldn't believe how frustrating that is for us because people get questions wrong when we know they should get them right. So here's a promise. There are no trick questions in this exam. We're not always being evil, and the obviously right answer is, you know, just for once, probably the right answer to the questions.
Definitely. And really, we're one thing that we're focused on is trying to pick up on or test about a lot of the misunderstandings about reliability-centered maintenance that are out there. Can you talk a little bit about that, Mark?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you here about what we're doing with the wrong answers because sometimes what we want to do is to check if you've got some misconceptions here. Misconceptions that people might have about the whole process. You know, you sometimes come across people who've misunderstood something about quite a lot of parts of RCM. It can be functions, functional failures, failure modes. Consequence categorizations is a favorite one where people get things wrong. And the wrong thing sticks in their head for weeks, months, years sometimes. You know, misunderstandings are things that people think are true, but they're not really. And that can prevent you from being productive in an RCM group because when the facilitator uses a term, you might understand something totally different and everybody gets confused. Here we go. Here's Nancy, you can put the screen share back on.
Yep.
Give you an example. This is, I don't think this is a question that's in the exam. It's always a possibility, but here's a possible question. What are the potential failure conditions for the failure mode pump bearing fails? And the idea is it's like the nut question. You select all of the ones that apply. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it, but I don't think you're going to need more than that. I'm not going to ask you to put the answers in the chat because that can just be too embarrassing if you get it wrong.
But in the meantime, Mark, we've had people from two people from India, three people from India join us, and Andy wants us to know that bananas are herbs. I didn't know that. So
What?
thank you
Sorry,
for that, Andy.
can you say that again, Nancy?
Yeah, Andy says that the banana plant is an herb and not a tree, but the banana carries seeds, so should be considered a fruit. Ah, okay. But see, there's that like gray area, and thank you for that, Andy. We're definitely not going into the gray area with the exam. And just before we get to that, Mark, let me put up here that through the end of April, through April 30th, we're offering 50% off of your level 1 RCM certification. So you can just go to our website, rcmcertification.org, and put in the coupon code RCM50. Now, if you're not ready to take the exam right away, that's okay. You can come back and take it, so don't let that stop you if you want to take advantage of our launch special. So, all right. So thank you, Andy, and thank you, Mark. So now let's talk about which one here is not a potential failure condition.
Oh, Andy, I know I'm learning so much today, and I thought I was doing pretty well with knowing that tomatoes are not a vegetable. Have I got that right? Somebody can tell me in the comments. Let's see. Okay, so we were on this one where you've got choice of bearing vibration high, bearing seized, bearing hot, or bearing noisy. And which of these are possible potential failure conditions? And I guess everybody's probably got this. That's the bearing vibration high. That's something that happens before the bearing fails. The bearing's hot or the bearing's noisy. Now, why is B the wrong answer? Well, obviously, bearing seizes is what happens when it's failed. It's not a potential failure. It's the functional failure. When it happens, bearing's dead.
Yep, that does not look like a good failure mode.
Yeah, Nancy, you're right. And to some extent, we've exaggerated it for the example, because it would have been a whole lot easier for the group if the failure mode had read bearing seized in the first place, that you identified the root cause of failure, because it makes it obvious that what root cause we're talking about, and that tells you the functional failure point.
Yep, and something else, Mark, I talk to a lot of people where the terms failure mode and failure cause, the term failure mode means different things to different people. So just to reiterate that our exam is in accordance with SAEJ 1011, and 1011 says that a failure defines a failure mode as what causes a functional failure. So if anyone is watching and is confused by that, then it's important to note that JA 1011 says a failure mode is what causes a functional failure.
Yeah, sometimes I wish we could rewrite the reliability dictionary, because there are so many terms like that do mean something slightly different to different people depending on exactly where they've come from. And that's a very good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, the reasoning behind the right answers are obvious in this one. The question is, what are the examiners doing with this second answer, B, where the bearing's seized? Why is that in there? Well, it's not just something we threw in there. It's because it's a misconception. It's an understanding about potential failures that's actively wrong. So you've seen this, I guess, a fair number of times before, that failure starts to occur. At some point, you can pick it up by vibration or noise or heat. And at that point, you've got a potential failure. It hasn't failed yet, but if you leave it, it's going to fail. And then if you leave it, it will go right through to the functional failure point. And it's this interval between potential and functional failure that gives you an opportunity to inspect the bearing, to measure its vibration, say, and take some action if you discover that it's on the way out, if it's going to fail. Now, here's something really strange. A problem we see, I'm not exaggerating here, it's almost all the time, is that people go through an RCM introductory course, or they read a book, and they still don't get P2F intervals. And that can do a lot of things to the analysis. Now, let's say Fred joins a review group and the facilitator starts talking about potential failures, about the bearing by vibrating or making noise. Now, Fred isn't thinking that at all. Fred thinks that potential failure is all about bearing seizing. So he's thinking about the functional failure point. Now, what does he think in his mind is the potential failure point? Well, he thinks that condition-based task is looking for failed components, not ones that are in the process of failing. So now he's lost the concept of the potential failure point. He starts to believe sometimes that the P2F is the time between the component being new and when it fails. So it's something like the life or the mean time between failures, the MTBF. Nancy, could you just take the screen share off for a second, please?
Yep, the screen share is off.
Thanks. Now, what happens here is if the facilitator doesn't recognize this problem, it is going to totally derail the analysis. I mean, even worse is that rarely, but possibly, people like Fred get to be RCM facilitators and they still don't understand condition-based tasks.
Yeah, having a facilitator is such an important part of the process because a facilitator has a lot more training than, say, a working group member has, and is trained to pick up on these nuances and to pick up when a working group member is not thinking along the same lines. And, you know, that just goes back. This is another reason why our hearts and souls are in RCM certification is because there are misconceptions and because RCM is sometimes misapplied and people don't get the results that they want. And then RCM gets the bad rap when really the principles were just not, they were misunderstood and misapplied. So that's another reason why we are all dedicated to this.
Yeah, and if you're going to become a facilitator, you know, you've got to have the confidence to be able to intervene. When somebody comes into the group and obviously doesn't understand something, you really have to have the confidence to be able to correct them early on and to be able to give them some guidance on what these things really mean. Anyway, so here's one of the things that really needs to be debunked. It's mean time between failures. And, you know, John Mowbray used to go on and on and on about mean time between failures all the time. And there's so many things that can go wrong with MTBF that it just isn't time to go through all of them. But I'll tell you a story. I was once asked to visit a company with a new facility, and the call I got leading up to it was really strange because usually it's fairly vague. You know, we've got a problem with production, we've got more downtime than we want. No, this guy was really sure what the problem was. They had a limited number of times, for reasons I won't, limited number of people they could actually have doing the maintenance, not entirely for monetary reasons, partly because physically they actually couldn't station enough people on this asset to do it. Now, that was unusual by itself, and most companies don't realize how overstretched their maintenance teams are. But this was so bad they just couldn't ignore it. And when I went over to see them, I think I drove something like 5 hours to see them. I was really lucky because, one, I got hold of the maintenance planner, and secondly, I was so lucky I happened to ask the question, tell me how you developed your maintenance plan. And what he did was, he reached over to his shelf and he pulled out a 4-inch thick binder. I couldn't find one thick enough on the office shelf here. And I said, okay, so that's your maintenance plan. I was already thinking, well, there could be a lot of detail in there. It's, you know, maybe it's not as serious as all this. But he said, okay, this is how we put the plan together. We looked for failure data for similar equipment we've used before, or we got mean time between failure figures from industry databases. Then we worked out the MTBF at a component or an equipment level and set up a replacement or overhaul task with its interval at half the mean time between failures. And he said, because we couldn't be certain about what the mean time between failures actually was. You know, they wanted to make sure that they allowed for uncertainty. So to be a little more explicit about it, is screen share on, Nancy?
No, I'm doing it now.
Okay, brilliant, thanks.
There we go.
So here's what the planner thought. He thought that he could take the mean time between failures, and let's say it was 4.5 years. He was assuming that there would be a low failure rate until they got to somewhere around the MTBF, and then things would pick up and start failing. So if they were to replace or overhaul the equipment at 2 years, that was going to be safe, wasn't it? And all of you are crying out now saying, no. We all know that that just isn't the case. Well, this is almost certainly what they got, that the mean time between failures was 4.5 years. But for most of these pieces of equipment, one of the things RCM teaches you is that there is really no relationship between age and the chance of failure. Or if there is, then it's probably that when something's new or when it's recently overhauled, it's most likely to fail. And so this was the reason they had so much maintenance in there that was not doing anything except taking up their time. And the danger here is, of course, what they thought was a life of over 4 years was likely to be this flat rate of, that comes to about 0.22 per year, or a chance of about 20% of failure in any 1 year period. So they're expending time and effort and money that they didn't have and achieving absolutely nothing. So these guys hit the ball right out of the park with 2 prize-winning misconceptions in 1 maintenance policy. And it was worth driving 5 hours there and 5 hours back just for that. First, that mean time between failure was the same thing as life. And second, that scheduled restoration or discard could apply to anything if the interval was less than the mean time between failures. The airline industry knew 40 years ago why this doesn't work, because most failures happen totally at random. And this is just straight from a 40-year-old report by Nolan and Heap, and I guess most of you have seen this before. The patterns of failure are mostly not related to age. So you can do planned overhaul or replacement on these, and the chances of a failure tomorrow are probably going to be exactly the same as they were yesterday before you did the maintenance. If you're unlucky, you're going to introduce more problems that you fix. Now, until that visit, I used to believe that the I found it really difficult to believe that the second generation of maintenance was still around. It was like finding a living, breathing dinosaur walking down the road. But if you're facilitating or you're a group member, I think you need to watch for people who have these really, really deep-seated but totally incorrect ideas about reliability.
So, Mark, are there any more hints that you can give that you can give people today?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Well, not too much, because I think I've said enough. But there's just one thing I'd like to talk about for, to some extent, a personal reason, but also from the point of view that there's something that I think in RCM, it needs a plea on its behalf, because it doesn't have the impact of failure modes, it doesn't have the drama of failure effects, or it doesn't have this fantastic logic of a decision diagram. It's the bit of RCM that it sits in the corner at a party just hoping somebody's got to pay it attention.
But Mark, sometimes the quiet person in the corner is the most interesting and, from a woman's perspective, most handsome.
I don't know how to answer that one, Nancy. No, you are so right. And, I'm going to say this, please just don't ignore functions. I know that they're at the start of RCM books and at the start of RCM courses, and at that point you're probably, just getting going in the morning and getting a few coffees and starting to learn about the subject. I understand why people don't pay functions as much attention as they should do, and neither did I. When I first met John Mowbray, I thought he spent just too much time on the operating context and functions. He was always talking about them. And I just wanted to get on with the exciting stuff, that, the failure modes where the equipment overheats and it seizes up and it explodes and it disintegrates. And I'm really sorry, I was wrong. Getting the functions right can set you up for a great analysis. If you get them wrong, or you give them too little thought, it's really going to make you pay, because extracting the failure modes and effects is so much more painful. Now, the review group can get into huge arguments because no one really knows, if the function statements are wrong, what the equipment is supposed to do. A vague function like to cool the engine oil is really easy to write, and it gets you onto the next function really quickly. But when you get to the failures and you come back to those functions, it's not going to remind you to deal with the partial failure, the oil that's too hot or too cold. That's what the performance standard's there for, to make you think not just about the cooling system failing completely, but also, how could the oil get too hot? How could it get too cold? And really, I'm not going to say much more about functions, but you can give them just this little extra bit of love. Know the difference between primary and secondary functions. And particularly, know what it doesn't mean as well as what it does mean. Oh, and finally, I'm going to stop in a second, but here's some good news. You don't need a calculator for this exam. And a couple of people asked that, and I just wanted to make sure everyone knows it. I promise you, there's nothing in here you can't do in your head if you're prepared to think about it. Okay, I think that's me, I think, Nancy. I think I've said enough now. And so thanks for listening. Yeah. And I'll hand back to you. I'll go off into the corner of the party and sit there and see if someone comes to find me.
Well, Mark, what you say about functions, yes, a lot of times functions are written just as a matter of routine, like you said, to cool the oil or, to provide compressed air. But I've facilitated analyses, and I have no doubt that you, Jesus, and Graham have also, where it was actually where the most fruitful part of the analysis, because oftentimes when you're asking your working group members, what specifically do you need from this asset, sometimes they don't really know. And then when they finally work out specifically what they need, they realize they've been asking it to do something that they couldn't. Yeah. And that was the reason for the chronic failure and the chronic unreliability. So something as simple as that. So, a lot of times, and it doesn't just go for LCM, it goes for human beings in our own lives. We're so busy with the details, right? And taking care of all this stuff up here that we don't see what's right in front of us. Have you had that experience also?
Oh, yes, Nancy. And there is a principle that we have to bear in mind when we do RCM. And it is that RCM is all about what the asset does and not about what the asset is. Because an asset could be something, but maybe doing something different than the asset, besides it, which is totally equal, physically. So we have to bear in mind that it is all about the functions. It is all about the mission of the asset, and there is something else about criticality.
Yes, absolutely. Mark, thank you. And Mark, thank you also for debunking one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to mean time between failure or MTBF. I have no doubt that is, it's definitely an eye-opener. And what I always say when I train is that, or give a presentation, is that if we're sharing information today that what we would ask you to do is think about the people in your organization who may not know, who really should. And so, that's another thing about all this is, we hear over and over that whose responsibility is reliability, and really reliability is everyone's responsibility. And it begins with understanding the basics of maintenance and reliability, which are jam-packed in the LCM process. No doubt about it. Okay, so if you have any questions, put them in the chat. But in the meantime, we would like to announce that we're coming back to you live on Wednesday, April 21st at 9 a.m. And Graham is going to be our featured speaker. And Graham is going to debunk another big misconception about RCM. So Graham, would you share what you, maybe give us a little teaser on what you're going to talk about?
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Sure. Oh, am I still muted? No.
No, you're good.
Yeah, it concerns electronics, and in fact, I'm thinking about a major piece of electronics that was fitted very widely in the Royal Navy, and the study that we carried out was very illuminating. First of all, and I'm glad you mentioned the business about functions and not understanding those and being a source of unreliability, but that particular equipment did have a history of unexpected failures. And there were several things that came out of that study, but one of them that lasted with me is most engineering organizations have daily meetings, usually daily meetings, to discuss all the problems they had in the last 24 hours, right? I remember doing that not only in the Navy, but in the sugar industry. We were plagued with all sorts of problems, and we'd agonize it on a Monday morning, about what the problems were, so that the factory manager could go and make his report to the general manager. And we talk about what went wrong, failure modes, the effects, how important it was, so criticality. And you start thinking, well, hang on, those sort of meetings are no more or less than an RCM analysis. But the big difference is that analysis is being done after the event, so it's very reactive, whereas RCM is proactive, and it preempts, well, hopefully will preempt these sort of failures. And this sort of came to mind when we were doing this radar study, about which I'll talk next week. They gave us a contract to carry out this study, which we did. It was very interesting, learned a lot. It was one of the group of pilot studies that the Royal Navy decided to take on. And I have to say, the expectations were very low, because the general feeling was, well, electronics is a bit of a waste of time, really. You just fix it when it fails, don't you? Anyway, we did this, and coincidentally, about a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks after the analysis completed, but crucially before the analysis recommendations were put in place, there was a major exercise that the Royal Navy attended. It was on the eastern seaboard of the US. It was very high profile, and during the course of that exercise, it was about a fortnight's worth, every ship that was fitted with this equipment reported an operational defect. And I have to say that was to the intense embarrassment of everybody concerned. So we got to thinking, those guys who did the study, let's have a look and see, have we considered them? All of those failures had been considered, and also a suitable failure management strategy had been identified. And it was at that stage the Navy said, oh, RCM in our electronics is pretty good. It was brilliant. And as I say, we learned a lot. So I thought I might share some of the learning, some of the lessons that we learned next week. So that's a taster.
Excellent. Thank you, Graham. Okay, so join us next week, Wednesday, April 21st, 9 a.m. Central. That's, I'm doing the math quickly in my head. It's 3 p.m. UK time, where Graham will debunk the misconception that RCM cannot be applied to electronics. So while we're just finishing up, Mark, can I put you on the spot? And will you share screen our website so we can just talk about a
Yeah.
couple of quick things? But in the meantime, let's see, 𝗂𝗲𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂. Let's see, any idea? Okay, maybe we can cover that question in another live 𝗂𝗲𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂. Let's see. Oh, Sam, will these webinars be archived? Yes, Sam, we are going to, our last one is on our website, and I will put this one on our website. But thank you, Sam. That is an excellent segue. If you are interested, you can go to our website, and let me see. Okay, I'm getting there, Mark. Here we go. Mark, would you go to /subscribe? You just go to our website, rcmcertification.org/subscribe, and you can just put your name and email address in there, and then I know you have to type it in, Mark. There isn't a. There's no link to it. Sorry about that. I know,
That's
see, I'm
fine,
putting you
yeah,
on the
yeah.
spot. We are most definitely live and unscripted here. Yeah, you can just go there and put your name and address in, and then you'll be on our email list, and we will email you with when we're going live and with some regular new information about reliability-centered maintenance. So please do that. And the other thing, if you can maybe go to the home page,
Yep.
just to reiterate, so it's rcmcertification.org, and all you have to do is just scroll down and click the get the certification a little bit. Yep, there we go. 50% off. Oh, not that one, Mark. Just scroll up a little more. Sorry. See, we're definitely live and unscripted.
Yep.
Yeah, you can go there too.
This
you
one
can go
will
there
work.
too.
Yep.
It'll work. Get level 1. Just find a button that says get level 1 certification now. And
Yeah.
rats. That's okay. But just click on that and put in the coupon code RCM50 and you'll get 50% off the certification. So let's see. I think that's it for today. Does anyone have any last questions or any thoughts before we sign off? Yep, Sam, don't worry. If you have a conflict, not to worry, because if you sign up, we'll send you a link where the replays will be. Okay, Luis says he's looking forward to seeing us next week. Thank you. And Khalid, thank you for joining us. Sonia, thank you so much for tuning in. Any last words from anyone?
I want to congratulate Mark for a great presentation, Mark.
Yes.
I'm just going to say, give those functions some love. They don't get enough.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. And all right, then we will see all of you Wednesday, April 21st at 9 a.m. Central, 3 p.m. UK. And that's 10 a.m. Eastern time, right, Jesus?
10 a.m. Eastern time.
Okay, well, have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.